Welcome, everybody. My name's Gary Fortney, and this is The Trend. As in our previous episode, we're talking about the 1993 child deaths in St. Louis, which was investigated by multi-jurisdictional agencies, law enforcement agencies, which formed into the St. Louis Area Task Force. If you had not listened to, please tune into our first episode regarding this investigation and this critical time and panic. I wouldn't say panic in St. Louis. Again, the 1993 child deaths that were investigated, in which involved the public as well as law enforcement in the solving of a couple of these cases. And so we're going to jump back into it. Laura got a chance really to know Cassidy Senter's mother and her life. And so I want Laura to jump into the personal aspect. A lot of what is lost is the human factor of the victims. And think about this. A lot of people know the suspect's name who killed Bundy. Everybody knows Ted Bundy's name, right? Name all the victims Ted Bundy killed. Name all the people that the Charles Manson cult killed. So let's talk about the victim. I never want to forget the victim. So Laura, why don't you jump in a little bit about Cassie and what you want to talk about that a little bit, some information.
Cassidy was just your typical 10-year-old kid. She was full of life. She enjoyed her friends. She enjoyed school. She enjoyed doing stuff with her family. She and her mother were pretty close. It was just a difficult time to have a 10-year-old just disappear and be killed.
The emotions on the family was pretty large. And again, Cassie lived with mother and mother's boyfriend, right? And it was at his house pretty much, or how would you explain the relationship there?
Well, actually, it wasn't her boyfriend. It was a friend of hers. And unfortunately, her parents had split and they were staying with a friend of her mother's at a house that was, in the neighborhood where she was going to school.
Yeah. How about the focus of the investigation? If you have, let's say, a missing child, what's the initial focus on? Who are we going to look at first? And I want you to talk a little bit about this, which is the right thing to do, and then you realize we need to change. So what about that, Laura? Who do we look at first?
Well, you always look at the people closest to the victim. Is there any motive there? Is there any reasons? You don't always just assume it's an outside source. You have to eliminate people before you can, continue. And that's one of the first things you eliminate is friends and family.
So the mother was looked at and her friend, right?
Yes. And always the last person to see her. Yeah.
And again, think about that, the last person to see her, and that was the mother's friend. And so he was looked at very close, right? So, and when we saw this, I felt a little bit bad. I don't say a little bit. I felt bad for the friend, but again, you don't, because Laura, we had to do what we had to do at the time.
Right.
All right. And Laura was very professional in dealing with the friend and the mother. And again, she was the point of contact. I never talked to the mother or friend. That was not my job. I was one of the investigators. We don't want to have too many people overwhelming the family. And so Laura was a good conduit to associate herself with the family. So let's go into the task force. When we last left you, we're talking about some mistakes that were being made for the investigation and some mistakes that I think were being made by some of the command decisions that were made. I'm retired. I have a little bit more leeway to talk about some things. I'm not trying to discredit or discount anybody's decision. It was relatively new. But let's talk about what we learned along the way. So, Laura, we had well over 100 investigators from St. Louis County, Chesterfield, St. Anne, the Major K Squad, St. Louis City, Montgomery County. We had investigators all over the place. Now, we had well over 100. And some of these were trained investigators. Some of these were investigators who had experience, but some were just uniformed officers who never investigated anything of this magnitude. So they were sent in. And so as we talked about in the previous episode, I'd go in one day and Laura would go in. We get a lead on Cassie one day, then get a lead on Amy, then a lead on Angie. Leads were all over the place. And it was overwhelming. Did you feel overwhelmed back then?
Absolutely. And something to point out, too, is no disrespect to anybody investigating the case. But as you know, when you're doing an investigation and you get information, you don't release all that to the public. And you can't release all that to other officers either, because it's going to get to the public. So there were things that we knew in our unit that everybody else didn't know. So when you're sending people out on leads, especially priority leads, and they're not on the right the A team, so to speak. They don't know the information we know. So when they're asking questions and doing things, they could be missing information because they don't have all the information.
Exactly. And things were being shared. So let me tell you a couple more mistakes that were being made. We'd go in the morning, we'd pick up a lead from whatever case, a stack of leads, we go work it, come back. There was no pre-brief in the morning meeting. And at the end, there was no meeting in the afternoon. We were just going in, working. If we got something, we'd tell somebody. No, it's being organized. So anyways, Laura, let's talk about how corrections were made about this too. And we're going to discuss this very in depth. The smartest thing we did was get rid of not to get rid of, to trim down the investigators from over 100 to 30. So why 30 investigators? We had a set of 10 investigators to assign to each individual murder case. 10 assigned to Cassidy Senter, 10 to Angie Hausman, and 10 to Amy Bone. All right. So that made it more manageable. And the people you work with, you got to know on a very personal basis. Instead of having 10, 15 sergeants, you had one sergeant assigned to one team. So our sergeant at the time was Sergeant David Glenn. He was the homicide sergeant that we actually worked with in our unit. So he was actually our supervisor in our team. Of the other investigative teams of 10 had different supervisors. So it was one supervisor to one set of detectives that was permanent. Remember that, Laura?
Right.
How'd you feel about having Dave Glenn as our supervisor?
Oh, he was great.
We did what we wanted pretty much, right?
Yeah.
He just wanted to be kept abreast, and he was actually shaking leads with us, right? He's going out on the street with us.
Absolutely.
So when we started doing this, so from hundreds of investigators, 100, we had 10 investigators per case, 30, one supervisor. Were things changed how we did the leads, Laura?
Yes, and that had to, because we had leads all over the place. And like I said, we needed to triage these leads, so we knew what to prioritize, what to put with what case. And some of us too, we realized that even though we're looking at all these as maybe being the same perpetrator, it didn't necessarily mean that it was. So we really had to break down what these leads were, which case was it more of a lead for, and get those leads to the right team so they could look at that information and decide, does this fit into our case, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, and that was a big part of it, is where do we go from here? Let's jump back into Amy Bone real quick and Angie Hausman. Angie Hausman was found in the bush wildlife area. She was handcuffed to a tree, and she had duct tape, or she was also secured by tape and stuff, all right? So she had been handcuffed to a tree while she was alive, from my understanding, from the pathology report. We had Amy Bone. She was found, if I'm not mistaken, in an open area. And also she had been kidnapped and she was murdered. And those are different jurisdictions. And we were not assigned to those. Even though we knew about the cases based on our previous leads, we were assigned to Cassidy Senter. So we're going to focus on the Cassidy Senter first, and we're going to talk about the solving of the Angie Hausman case a little bit later. So 10 investigators, 10 investigators per case, one supervisor, and we have prioritized leads priority 1 through 3. The priority 1 leads were investigated by the homicide detectives, the crimes against persons investigators, which we were. So we were given the priority 1 leads, and we took the priority leads. We investigated them on an immediate basis. Priority 2s and 3s were given to other investigators who are not necessarily homicide people. A little bit of hard feelings in that. Talk about that a little bit. Was that the right thing to do? Have us doing priority 1s?
Well, you had to. Like I said, the core 10 people that we had on our team knew all the ins and outs of the case, which is something you can't share with everyone. So you had to take the priority leads because you had to have people that knew what they were talking about. And when you had people from other units, and they're getting leads, they feel like they're just getting junk leads, and their chances of them getting the lead that was going to solve this case were slim to none. And they felt like this was a waste of their time, or they weren't as motivated, and they were a little disillusioned because they weren't, getting the best of the leads.
Well, I feel you put the people who had the most experience, not the best, the most experienced, to do the priority leads. That's what happened. So we were doing the priority 1 leads. So what happened is when we knew that we had the organization of our 10 investigators, we knew we had our supervisor, we had a meeting at the St. Louis County Police Academy, which is where we started. And we sat at a round table inside of the cafeteria. And Laura, I remember this. You can fill in the gaps if you don't mind, but we sat there and we says, what are we going to do? And I talked with Laura and the other investigators and Sergeant, and we made a decision. Let's pretend like we're going to go out just like the call happened. So
Start over.
So what did we do, Laura? Remember that day we went in the next day? What did we do?
Well, I think everyone was really frustrated because we took off running right away, and we didn't do some of the basics that we usually do because, again, there was so much chaos that it was a frenzy. And once we said, let's start over, let's just go back and start over and walk through the entire thing again. So that's what we did. We went back to the original scene. All of us went there. We walked through the scene. We looked at everything again and basically reworked the whole case.
And I remember all of us walking up the street. We had 10 investigators and I started walking up like in a row. And when we were walking around, people were looking at us, but that was the best thing we did, Laura. We started over. We went back at the exact same time she was reported missing. All right. And we knew day of the week she was reported missing. And we started square one. And during that time, Laura, I want to give a shout out to the FBI crime scene investigators.
Yeah.
His name was Herman Hoffman. Talk a little bit about the forensics, what we had discovered during the time period when we started investigating this, Laura. We'll get a little bit in depth about that because, you know, the forensics was such an important part.
Well, to get into the story a little bit to get there, because that was after Cassidy was found.
Yes.
You know, initially, just to go through this quickly, she was supposed to be going to her friend's house and never made it. They found the alarm outside of the house, a house, I should say, and we're looking at her being abducted and who knows where she went. So about, let's say 8-9 days later, she was found dumped in an alley in the city of St. Louis.
Correct.
And from there, you know, St. Louis City was involved, obviously, because she was found in their jurisdiction. And fortunately, because everyone knew immediately who this was, the FBI was able to get down there right away because they assisted with this. And they had their forensics team come in and started processing that scene. One of the things that they came up with was huge to this investigation were tire impressions.
Laura, can I just stop real quick there? Let's talk about where her body was found. And again, you have an alley, and the body could have been found on either side of the alley, but the body was found directly in the middle of the alley. And what was our thought process? So here's what I thought. If she had been dumped out of a side door of a car, she would have been on the side, but she was behind. So what were we thinking at the time about that, Laura?
Pickup truck and trunk of a car.
Yeah. So her body's found in the middle. So we thought maybe we do have a truck. So talk about the what Herman Hoffman did and the tire impression. We saw the dual tires. Explain that a little bit.
Well, once they had the tire impressions, they did their research and they came back and were able to tell us that this particular tire was a Goodyear workhorse tire. And this was not just a general tire that everybody used. It was for certain type of utility type vehicles and vans. So that narrowed our scope a little bit too. So now we know we're not looking for a passenger car. We're looking for some type of utility vehicle.
That had double wheels.
Yes.
And a tire impression is kind of like a fingerprint where you have certain cuts or imperfections in the tire from hitting road debris and stuff. And Herman Hoffman did a great job by gathering the tire impressions. Remember, Laura?
Yeah.
And they sent that to the FBI lab in Washington. And somebody may not know, but every tire ever made is on file with photographs or impressions to match. And they matched to the Goodyear workhorse. Laura, I remember the day we found that. That was a great jubilation, I would say, for us about the lead.
Yes, and that was another one of those things that you kind of hold back in your group because you don't always want to share everything right away.
And nobody knew but us, right? We kept it very, very quiet. So anyways, we walked through the neighborhood, and we're walking through the neighborhood. A lot of us were having conversations at the time, and we talked about how can we get more information. So what do we do about a canvas? Explain our process, what we decided to do for an area canvas. An area canvas is knocking door to door, talking to the neighbors if they saw anything. So explain what we did.
Well, in the course of starting all over again, which is what we felt we needed to do, we decided we wanted to redo the neighborhood canvas. And in addition to this, I don't know if you recall, when we were walking the subdivision, we also had some roadblocks set up because there wasn't a lot of ways in and out of this neighborhood. So we had roadblocks set up and we were actually talking to people coming and going from the subdivision, you know, at that time of day to see if anybody had seen anything and that and so forth. But when we talked about doing the canvas, we said we can't just go up door to door and say, did you see anything? Because we've already asked all these people that. So we need to get a little more specific in what we're looking for. Because when you just say, do you know anything? Did you see anything? You know, nah, I don't know anything. We've already talked to you. Well, they didn't want to keep talking to you necessarily. Some people were really helpful. Some people didn't want to be bothered. But we decided we're going to come up with this questionnaire because we're going to really target what we're looking for. And we wanted all of our investigators asking the same questions.
And that's a very smart. That's actually helped us solve the case, Laura. And we sat down late in the evening and we were writing down what question. We had, I think, 20 questions, not too much, that people could easily answer. And so we sat down and we had this questionnaire. Then we picked a day to go do the canvas, right?
Right.
All of us went out there. How about the results of the canvas? What do you remember about the canvas? What significant information?
Well, in doing the canvas, too, we wanted to make sure every single house was contacted. And we had, each detective was given 5 houses to make contact at, and they had to make contact with those people at those houses. And everybody, all the detectives got packets, and every one of them, I mean, we covered that entire neighborhood.
And we had thick packets to review. So canvas was done the day that she was reported missing in the same street, same houses.
The original canvas.
Original canvas, and then we did recanvas, which was after her body was found, and we were part of all this, part of it being on the team together. Laura, significant information on the canvas. What did we find out? Again, I want you to tell a story because all of us were there, but you're such an important part, and me work with you on this. I want you to explain the results of the canvas. How did that help us focus in?
Well, in the canvas, because we were asking specific questions, we were getting information that we weren't getting before.
Yep.
So some detectives who happened to be right in the area where the alarm was found were talking to people and asking those questions. So when it came down to being more specific about, have you seen anybody living at your neighbor's house? Has anybody been visiting those houses? Has there anybody been home from college or home for Christmas, or any new faces? And when we were starting to get a little more specific about who your neighbors are, then information was coming forward. Well, the house over there, I know there's several people that come and go out of that house. And they talked about right around the time that Cassidy was found that the people at that house had a U-Haul truck. And they remember the U-Haul truck because when the guy he pulled out going really fast, screeching tires. He hit a mailbox and was just doing stupid things, which drew their attention. But this was information that never came to us before.
Explain when that happened. Wasn't that a specific day that this happened? The day what?
That was the day that her body was recovered.
So that was really significant. Yeah, that's good explanation. We had the U-Haul truck leaving quickly, hitting something, not stopping to keep on leaving. So what we decided to do, Laura, is what did we do when we got that information?
Well, the reason that information became so significant at the time was because when we found Cassidy, in addition to the tire impressions that were found, there was also some bedding that she was wrapped in. And we had some flakes of orange paint and some aluminum flakes. And as soon as they said U-Haul truck, it was like everybody just knew this is it.
So we go to the U-Haul place. I want to say we because a collective group. And what's the first thing they looked at when they went to the U-Haul place?
Well, they're looking for the truck, and they were able to contact the and we just happened to get lucky. It was the U-Haul place closest to where this occurred. Contacted the manager, were able to find out that this truck was rented and who rented it, and it just rolled out.
Well, I remember we looked at the tires, and they were Goodyear Workhorse tires. So when we saw Goodyear Workhorse tires, we felt like we were on the right track.
Yeah.
So again, and the business, did they give us the information about who had rented it?
Yes.
And we went down, and it happened to be where we knew the exact truck too. We had the same truck, everything.
Yeah, that truck hadn't been used since, so we were lucky there too.
We secured the truck, and then we kind of became focused, right? Who had rented the truck?
Well, and some things we knew because, the neighbors who were able to tell us where the truck came from doing other canvases and stuff, we knew who lived there. We knew who had been there. So we already had some names and some things going for us. So we were able to, when we were at the U-Haul, we were able to ask them specifically, did you rent to any of these people? And, one of those names was there.
And the name was Thomas Brooks.
Correct.
Thomas Brooks had rented the U-Haul, and that day, and that was the same day that Cassie's body was found. Laura, remember when that happened? That was such a closely guarded secret that we never released any. Remember how close we were,
With some of that evidence, we had to be.
Yeah.
I think the only thing we released some of the bedding information. I think we had pictures of that we gave to the media to show because, there was a theory if somebody recognized the bedding, they'd come forward and say, that was mine. This is where I took it, something to give us some more leads.
Well, it's like the Luigi Mangione case because they were releasing photographs of Luigi Mangione from surveillance photos that normally wouldn't do. But that helps solve the case. So like Laura said, you have to make a decision, which we made a decision. What do we release to the public, what we don't? We didn't talk about the aluminum flakes, didn't talk about the orange paint, didn't talk about the house, but something to do identification. We decided to focus on the family, right, Laura?
Correct.
And we focused individually on the family at that time. What do we know about them? What could we do to find out about them? And you want to get a little bit into that and just a little bit details about who lived there and stuff.
Well, we knew some information from talking to other residents during the previous canvases, and then we had a couple times detectives had already gone there and knocked on the door. We had circumstances where the people who were actually renting weren't there because their power was supposedly out. And then there was a question, well, were they there? Weren't they there? And everything just became very unusual with this particular house. And some of the information was it wasn't matching up.
And let me tell you one thing that we realized, that was the house nearest to where the alarm was found. So the alarm was found almost right directly in front of this house, the truck leaving at a high rate of speed, and some unusual behavior at the house. So we focused on them. Who lived in the house at the time was Thomas Brooks, his sister, Cassandra Quinn, and her Cassandra Quinn's boyfriend, LaFranz Wilson. I'm not going to say that other children live in the house too. We're not going to say their names, all right?
Yes.
But these names are all in public information I just mentioned. So we started looking and focusing directly, and a decision had to be made. What are we going to do? And Lord, did you feel like we got as far as we could before we had to make a decision to interview the people? We did a good background, didn't we?
Yeah, we tried to get as much information as possible so we knew what we were dealing with, and we knew if they were going to tell us something, we would already know if what the information they were giving us was true or false.
So we worked it until we felt, listen, we have no other choice. We got to talk to them. So we picked up all three at the same time, simultaneously. We were all given somebody to interview. I was assigned to interview with LaFranz Wilson with another detective at the time. His name was Ken Cox, who turned out to be the deputy chief of the county police and who I've remained friends with. Laura, you're assigned to Cassandra Quinn, right?
Right.
Who'd you interview Cassandra with? Do you remember who?
Gary Barrow.
Gary Barrow. So Laura's assigned to interview the sister, and then we had Thomas Brooks, right?
Right.
And he was interviewed by Bill Osdorf, right?
Well, and what we were doing that day also is we had gathered all our information and we were executing a search warrant also
at the same time
at the house.
So let's think about that. We picked up all three at the same time, and we felt like we had enough evidence. We applied for based on probable cause, got a search warrant from a judge. So the search warrant is being conducted simultaneously. And during the interview, we're all getting out, kind of exchange information, what's being told. And we found some inconsistencies in their statements.
Correct.
So the search warrant's taking place. I was talking to LaFranz Wilson at the time, and I'm not going to say this broke the case, but it actually was a starter in the case.
He was the first one to bend.
Yeah. Fortunately, I was able to be part of that interview, and LaFranz was denying any involvement. I had to be careful interviewing him. He waived his rights, agreed to be interviewed, and he denied any involvement. Well, I found some inconsistencies in the statement. And back there's reward for $70,000 for the arrest and conviction of anybody involved. And my thought process was, did I think LaFranz killed Cassidy Senter? I didn't know. All right. So I had to try getting him talking. And I talked about the reward. Talking about that and talking about the case and talking about this without getting too specific. LaFranz eventually made a comment to me. And I said, do you really, you know what happened, don't you? You know what happened. He goes, well, what if I do? When he said, what if I do? What did I think? We got him. All right.
That's the start.
And so that's a start. So he gave me and Detective Cox, who again, he's retired. He turned out to be deputy chief of the county police. He gave us information to show that he was involved, and Thomas Brooks is the one who actually killed Cassidy Senter, and Cassandra Quinn knew. So remember, we all got out. We all started talking to each other, right, Laura?
Yeah.
We exchanged, and we knew we had the right people. So what happened is we told them at the search warrant, they changed the whole time. Talk about the little bit of forensics that was obtained at the search warrant after they gave us information.
Well, we went to the house, and obviously we're looking for any indications that Cassidy had been there. And in doing the forensics, we actually were able to come across the pin for the alarm that was found outside the house. Cassidy had it on her at the time she was in the house.
Laura said pen originally. They found an ink pen next to the alarm, but the pin for pulling the alarm was in the basement of the house.
Correct.
And so what else? Some other things they got out of the house were hairs, right?
Yeah, just the physical evidence. I think there were some, I know we tried cleaning the house with bleach and some other things like that. We had to go back and do some more forensics on that, but we were able to get enough between that and the statements that were made and the truck, and we were able to slowly put the whole case together.
So the aluminum fragments were from the hand cart that was in the U-Haul. We believe that they took her out of the basement with a hand cart, and that was the blue Flexiplane that were part of her body. The aluminum fragments from the back of the inside of the U-Haul truck, that's where the aluminum fragments came from. A bed slat was found in the basement, right, Laura?
Yes.
And what did that turn out to be?
That was the weapon he used to hit her over the head.
And that's how she was killed. We found mop fibers, hair fibers, carpet samples, and we also found some plant material on the outside that was wrapped mixed in her body.
Correct.
And that was by a botanist who did that. So we found the plant material on her body and then matched that to some plant material in the backyard. That's where they brought her body from. So we had all this information. And then eventually you and I interviewed Cassandra, right? And we got her to what?
She finally talked about what happened. She finally said what she knew and that her brother was a person involved in it.
And with the information we got, then eventually Thomas Brooks confessed to killing Cassidy Senter. Let me talk about some things that I've learned on this case. Laura, I think I call this a myopic or a single view. And I had a view she was abducted in a car, taken from the area, killed, and her body's dumped. What really happened? Explain what he said and what you think really happened regarding the disappearance and murder of Cassidy.
Well, in the statement Brooks made, he said that he was at the house. He had called for a cab because he was going to go to work up at a McDonald's close by. He was waiting for the cab to show up, and Cassidy came up to the door. And when she came up to the door, he opened the door and he let her in. And then she pulled her pants down and wanted him to have sex with her, was his statement.
That's his statement. Talk about the ink pen and where her alarm was found, and talk about where we had the one view. It turned out what really happened.
Well, like I said, further in his statement, he said that when her alarm went off, that he couldn't quiet the alarm either. So he took the alarm and opened the front door and threw it out the front door. Well, we know that in addition to the alarm being out there, a pen that she carried was out there too. And it was a unique pen, and that's why we knew it was hers. We were able to match it from other things that she had and friends that had seen her with it. And these two items were right next to each other by the street. And we know the difference in the weight of the alarm and the weight of the pen. And there's no way throwing those two objects, they were going to end up at the same location. So I think we were still of the belief, even though he never said it, that he actually abducted her off the street.
And drug her to his house.
Took her to the house.
Yeah, I talked to LaFranz, and he got a little bit more detail about what happened. So let's surmise, kind of piece together what happened here based upon what I believe and what the evidence shows, all right? Laura and I agree that we think she was abducted off the street, right, Laura?
Yes.
Taken into the house, and she was taken immediately to the basement, right?
Yes.
And what she did, as soon as she got to the basement, she
pulled her alarm.
Pulled the alarm. And it was so loud. So Brooks, in a panic, had to figure out what to do. And I think he hit her with the slat right away. Is that what you think too, Laura, to quiet her down?
Yeah, I'm not sure where he got it from, but he had to do something to quiet her down. And there was some information there. She might have pulled it as soon as she got in the door. And then he knocked her down the stairs, threw the alarm, and then came down and, grabbed the slat and assaulted her there.
But the bed slat was found inside the house,
yes,
which turned out to be the murder weapon. That was actually presented in court as the murder weapon. She had a severe blunt force trauma to her head. I had heard, I don't know if it was Cassandra or LaFranz or what, that Cassie was running around the basement in a panic, didn't know what to do. Here's a young girl locked in a basement by herself who'd been abducted, didn't know what to do. So she pulled the alarm and she was trying to get out. And that's when she was hit with the bed slat. And Brooks throwing the alarm out the front of the house, landing on the street. But again, the pen no way would have landed with that alarm. So that's why we thought she was abducted off the street. And that's what came to the view. She was abducted. She wasn't. Let me tell you about a sad part of this. The public may or may not know. When a canvass was done that night, law enforcement officers knocked on the door and they went in the house to interview her during the canvass. Right, Laura?
Yeah. It was that day or the next day.
Next day.
Right close right there.
Yep. They did a canvass. And while they were upstairs, who was downstairs?
She would have been in the basement.
She was dead downstairs. So the detectives we talked to that felt heartbroken that they were actually upstairs talking to Cassandra Quinn and the family when Cassie's body was downstairs. And it's heartbreaking. And again, there's nothing they did wrong. How about the dead fish story?
Yeah. I think because there was a smell of some ammonia and stuff like that just from some cleanup that they were doing, that I think it was trying to kind of hide the smell
of Cassie's body.
But
it was
decomposed. It was too early after the abduction for there really to be any kind of evidence that she was in the basement that was noticeable.
Yeah. So that was the thing about she made him. There was dead fish in the house, but there could have been from the smell from her decomposing body because she was taken out almost 9 days later. So that's
when she was finally taken out.
Yeah, when she was finally taken out. So, anyways, the body had remained downstairs. We know that for sure for that long. The body had been wrapped in some curtains and some bedding. There was blood throughout the basement that they tried to clean up with a mop. Or Brooks did. And Cassandra Quinn knew the body was downstairs, and she wanted the body out
Right.
because of its smelling. So she ordered the body out, and that's when LaFrange worked with Thomas Brooks to get the truck, put her body in the back of the truck, and took her to the St. Louis City area and dumped her body in St. Louis City. And that's how her body was found. What happened to Thomas Brooks?
Eventually died.
He was convicted in court, right?
Right.
First-degree murder, armed criminal action, sexual assault. The reason I think there was a sexual assault, pubic hairs were found within her body.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I think there was still sexual assault. And again, what's the time she was alive or the time she was dead? But to have pubic hairs found on her body, we have our thought process about how that could have happened, okay, regarding sexual assault of her. So that was the solving the Cassidy Senter case. Let's talk about Angie Hausman real quick, just a couple of minutes. The Angie Hausman case remained unsolved for many, many years. And one thing that we always want to do is re-examine physical evidence. And re-examining the evidence is so critical. So there's cold case investigators, which I do cold case investigations. We're always looking at what is there more to do? So I got to hand it to the St. Charles County Crime Lab and the investigators from St. Charles County, and they stayed with it. They never gave up on Angie Hausman and reviewed a bunch of evidence about 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. About 2 years ago, they re-examined the evidence, and they're able to come up with a DNA hit.
Well, and the advancements in DNA have come so far since 1993 also, that they weren't able to do things back in 93 that they can today. And that's what makes reviewing cold cases so important, because you didn't have the tools then that you do now.
And yeah, they used to do PCR, polymerase chain reaction, short tandem repeats, and mitochondrial DNA. So those are the three types. I think they have more advances to do now, nuclear DNA and stuff, right, Laura? So it's advanced so much. I got to hand it to the St. Charles County Crime Lab personnel and the investigators in St. Charles County for speaking for Angie Hausman. Again, I'd love to have one of the investigators, right, one of them I do know personally, who worked on that case on a podcast, talk a bit more in depth about that case, because that really hit the nationwide news a little bit more than Cassidy did, but Cassidy was still as important as the other people. So anyways, Angie Hausman had justice. The person who killed her name was Earl Cox, and Earl Cox was found through a DNA hit. They put DNA into what's called CODIS, that stands for Combined DNA Index System. They have what's called APHIS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System, which identifies fingerprints. CODIS does DNA. And so Earl Cox was found through his DNA and matched, and eventually pled guilty, admitted killing her, in which he was convicted. And I think he died in jail, if I'm not mistaken. So I think he might be dead right now. The last one, got about 2 minutes. Let's talk about Amy Bone. Amy Bone was the first one that was reported missing and killed on December 4th of 1993. And we've never forgotten about Amy. It's still unsolved, but kind of interesting. I was doing an emergency vehicle operation instructor course about a week ago, and I had a Chesterfield police officer in my class. And we were talking about unsolved cases just while we're during the driving portion. And she knew I was a homicide detective. She goes, we have an unsolved case in Chesterfield of a girl. I said, Amy Bone. She goes, how do you know? I says, I worked that case in 1993 with other investigators. And she was shocked to know that I knew Amy's name, where she was abducted from, what happened to her, and it's still an active case. And so the female police officer from Chesterfield was kind of touched that I knew her. And there's a name to the missing girl who was found murdered. And we had a little bit of a chat about the case. I would love to take another look at that case, even being retired. And I know this officer from Chesterfield would love to do so also. So let's not forget about Amy also, right?
Correct.
And remember I told this in many episodes, we got to speak for the people that cannot speak for themselves. The first are the children. A young infant can't say who's abusing them. And a young child doesn't have ways to communicate sometimes what's happening to them. We got to speak for the elderly, right? Nursing homes, you can have elderly people that are abused and they can't say if they have Alzheimer's or dementia, who's doing it. Then we got to speak for the mentally ill. You can have young kids who are mentally ill, who have no way of communicating. And I've worked a few of those cases where we've had some mentally ill children that were murdered. And those are important to solve. And I'm not trying to be a smart ass here, but animals, you have animals that are abused. And when animals are abused, they can't verbalize who's doing that to them, but then it leads up to people. So again, in law enforcement, we speak for the people that cannot speak for themselves. And Laura, you spoke for Cassidy. And you and I worked a lot of hours on that, right?
No, the whole team did. It was definitely a team effort, and we were just very fortunate that we were able to put it together and solve it.
And let me talk about Laura, and I'm proud. We never gave up. We worked it. I'm getting a little emotional here, but we never gave up. I mean, we worked that case, and we spoke for her, and it was such a pleasure to work with you on a case. We worked multiple cases after that too. When you were with the IRS, Laura's with the IRS in the task force. I was with the DEA. Worked some cases there. and to still have Laura as a friend, and she'll always be my partner in the unit. So thank you all for listening. Again, I hope you learned something here. Again, I don't want to talk too much about Angie Hausman. I'll let the investigators who solved that speak for themselves. I'd love to have them on an episode, talk in depth about that case. I just want to congratulate the St. Charles County Crime Lab and the law enforcement personnel for solving that. And anybody know that I would love to still work the Angie Hausman, the Amy Bone case, to speak for her who was killed. So anyways, thanks so much for listening. We hope to have you back on future episodes. Again, stay informed. We'll do what we can on the Trend Podcast, talk about true crime, cold cases, the law enforcement community, and regional issues. Again, thanks to my guest, Detective Laura Nehring. She deserves respect being a detective. She'll always be my partners. Thanks all of you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Remember, we have the facts without the politics. My name is Gary Fortney, and this is The Trend. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this episode of The Trend. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us at The Trend's website at www.trendmediallc.com, or you can email us at any time at thetrend@trendmediallc.com. We welcome everybody's comments, suggestions, or reviews. Don't forget to stay connected with us on social media. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Trend Media Podcast, and join the conversation on Facebook by searching The Trend Podcast. Check out our Amazon page through the link on our website, where you'll find some of our recommended products. We'll be back next time with more true crime stories, insights on law enforcement trends, and current trends with our region and the people we serve. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay part of The Trend.